Okay. Seems like we're live.
Awesome. Yeah, so I guess to start off the stream, I mean, like, there's nobody here but us, but I so far, but we can figure out what am I drawing, because we put up the poll and said, you know, what should I do, because I have a bunch of drawings still to finish off for Nostalgitron, and yeah, so we had one of the play sets, a battle scene, the cereal box art, which I haven't even started yet. It's like earmarked, but that would be from scratch. Video game art, which is also from scratch for our fake ads that'll be inside the book. And then, did I have a fifth one? I think there was one more. I don't remember.
You had the ones that we went with are battle scene, cereal box style art, playset, spindle, or video game ad.
Oh yeah, okay.
And the overwhelming winner is cereal box style art, whatever that means, which I can picture, colorful cereal box with a mascot.
Yeah.
Not sure if you had something in mind for the book specifically. So this is fun because I also don't know what you're going to draw.
Yeah. See, everybody gets a little sneak peek of my Procreate. Not my whole Procreate folder though, because that would be too much. I have too many secrets in there. But let's go with, what are the dimensions of a cereal box? I think we'll start here with like an 11 by 17.
That's probably pretty big for, yeah. I guess it depends if you're going whole page in the comic book size and at that aspect ratio.
Yeah.
I see a few people have joined us, which is fun. So feel free to pop questions in the chat for Michael. And then also, Michael, I just wanted to suggest / remind, I think we discussed this as perhaps a little bit of a tutorial too. So
yeah,
kind of like, how do you, a professional graphic designer and illustrator, set up files? We have worked with different artists. We've done this a little bit with Ethan, and we will again. But it's always fun to kind of see how different minds approach creativity, as well as just the straight up, like, are your files are they all like actual final version 3? So you're starting with in Procreate creating a canvas. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. So for this one, so I, in this instance, this is the way that I think about stuff. Is not just what's the thing that we're doing here, because what this will be is a piece of art that I will then end up photoshopping onto a cereal box that will be in like a, part of your balanced breakfast type of stock photo that will appear inside the book as a fake ad of Ubun's absolutely horrendous but addictive cereal, Honey Bunches of Gunch, right? So that's the purpose of doing this art. But whenever I'm creating something, especially for a project like this, I want to make sure that I have like the most versatility in the finished product as possible, so that I can use it for multiple things. If you follow the social media accounts, you see that the character art that's going to appear in the book, we've repurposed over and over and over again in different pieces of social media. I even put together like a very like Star Wars-esque poster in Photoshop. I like to do just like my little for when I'm doing shows, I've got a little table card that sits there to say like, hey, go check out Enter the Nostalgitron with the QR code on it. And to do that, I made like a very Star Wars-esque layout of those characters, but it's all the existing character art that I've used for other stuff. So when I say that I'm trying to like maximize the versatility of the finished piece of art, that's what I'm talking about, is like, how can I make sure that this is going to be something that I can use on multiple things? So that's where, like, I don't know what the dimensions of a cereal box art are, but I'm going to work at 11 by 17 because I know that 11 by 17 is tabloid poster size. And so that means that we will also theoretically we could make posters of this art when it's done. Right. So I just making sure that like whatever I'm doing, it's gonna end up being something that I can use for multiple things.
Seems like standard cereal box is 12 by 8 inches for whatever reason.
Oh, is it? Okay.
That's just
okay. Yeah.
what Google said. I don't know.
Cool.
Who knows?
I mean, like that makes sense to me, like that, but there are jumbo boxes of cereal, and but yeah. So I'll work within that, and I'll make sure that like I've got a pretty wide margin on the art. Which when I start sketching, I'll explain more about that. But I've got the dimensions in there. The other thing that I'll just highlight 11 by 17 is that when we're working at print sizes, we always want to make sure that we're at least 300 DPI. Like that's the minimum that you want to go. With Procreate, you only get so many layers. And when you get to a big size, like 11 by 17, it really reduces the number of layers that you can have available to you. 35 layers might sound like a lot to somebody else. But let's say one of those pieces of character art, really, really simply done has at least 10 layers on it. Because you've got the line art, you have the flat colors, you've got your shadows, like your base shadow layer. So for me, because it's very cell shaded, that tends to be like that cell shaded shadow layer. And then I'll do for Nostalgitron a more like an airbrushed sort of almost 3D-ish layer of shadows. And then I'll have at least 2 layers of highlights, usually like a hard highlight and then a softer one, which I just duplicate that layer and blur it. But like right there, like we're up to 6 layers already. If you start adding in, like if a character's got a laser sword or something like that, then that's going to be multiple layers in order to do the effects for a laser sword. So 35 layers is actually not a lot. And what it means is that I'll end up having to like crunch stuff down a lot in order to use this dimension. The other thing that you need to think about when you're doing this stuff is the color space. When we do print, it ends up in CMYK. I'll do conversions to CMYK afterwards. Because if I try and illustrate in CMYK, I have to start worrying about things like Pantone colors, like spot colors, and I have to start pulling out swatches. And that's really just not a very conducive environment to illustration. So I'll work in RGB for this, and then when I go into InDesign later, I'll use the tools in InDesign, or I'll use Photoshop to convert color profiles over to CMYK. Which the difference being, screens use LEDs, right? And LEDs or even a tube TV is using red, green, blue color mixes in order to generate the colors that you're seeing on the screen. When we do print, we use CMYK. It's a 4-color process. So this, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, which people are becoming more familiar with because now that the Eco Tank printers and stuff like that have like the individual things, and you're like filling up the things. And but yeah, color printing is that 4-color process. And so you have very different things going on there. With CMYK, you're adding things up to make black. With RGB, you're adding things up to make white. So they're actually kind of opposite. And so the way that the colors interact with each other, especially blend modes and stuff like that, in CMYK are very, very different from RGB. So that's the tutorial on what setting up this canvas is going to look like.
Yeah, well, thanks. So let's get drawn, man. I didn't mean to hold you back with
no
with technical stuff. That's really good primer for sure. But yeah, no, I think a lot of people will understand some of those basics, and if not, a lot of that is fairly Googleable. But to recap, you're using Procreate, and you're going with a pretty big size here because you're trying to mimic, the cereal box, which is pretty enormous by print standards, swath of area to fill in. But you only have a certain number of layers to manage. So that's interesting. I forget that Procreate is not Photoshop.
Yeah, because it's natively running on the iPad, and it's also saving the files into the cloud under your Procreate account. It really limits you on sort of the size of the file. That said, this file, if I export it as a PSD, which I probably will at the end, it'll end up being like a gig or more because it's an 11 by 17. So it'll be a really big file, but that's why they're limiting you. Because if they let you have 100 layers on this, you would be dealing with like a 5-6 gigabyte file, which would be really, really hard for the iPad to handle. It would be really hard for Photoshop to handle. Even with like a souped up computer, that's still a very big file for those systems. Yeah. So, okay. So, for the art on this one, I think what we've talked about in the book, how we've described it, is it's Ubun basically like about to choke slam a space marine, right? Like that's kind of, he's very much like his propaganda art is on the cereal box. So yeah, I think like we're starting from scratch. Some of the other ones, like some of the play sets and whatever, I would be starting from a sketch that I've done, either like by hand or already done in Procreate, but we're starting from scratch here. So the first thing that I want to do is really like block out my characters that are going to be in here, and a lot of this might change. Like this is the really rough part of the process, but we just want to kind of get this in here. I can already tell that I've drawn Ubun too big, and he is going to need to be. I'm going to need to reduce the size of him if I want to also have room for a Space Marine that he's choke slamming. Whoops.
Trying to think what the opposite of cereal would be. So the still rider whom he's choke slamming is like, identified with some other verboten food, but that may be one level too many of the metaphor.
Yeah, what's the opposite of cereal? Honestly, I think the opposite of cereal is oatmeal, which I know that they're both grain based, but like if you sit me down and you go, here, like what are the polar opposites of breakfast foods? The polar opposite on the other end of the spectrum from cereal is definitely going to be oatmeal, because I'm never going to eat oatmeal. Wouldn't put that in my body if you paid me. But I'll eat cereal. I mean, I eat cereal almost every day. So,
Interesting.
Not for breakfast though. I have a protein breakfast, like protein based breakfast, so that my brain functions during the day. But when my brain doesn't need to function anymore, then I'll switch over to cereal. I basically treat it as a dessert, which I think is appropriate. I think is correct to look at most sugary cereals, even like the big cereal is going to come for us and shut down the stream. But I even like the quote unquote healthy ones, like a Special K or something like that. The sugar content on anything corn based is through the roof compared to healthy food.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, it's ultra processed food is the worst, but also I do kind of I don't eat a lot of cereal, but if I do, I eat it as a dessert because it's delicious.
Yeah,
but it is generally I eat granola the same way as a dessert. And Wind Up Monkey in the chat points out cereal cold and crunchy, oatmeal warm and soft. So yeah, they're kissing cousins because they're grains, but they're also like exact opposites in this kind of humoral system of breakfast stuff. Our preferred breakfast sludge is essentially congee or like rice porridges, rice soups. Because my wife and I both really like savory, spicy, salty foods. So neither of us would normally wake up and be like, I need a bowl of sugar. But I do enjoy, I like eggs in it as well, but I do enjoy some carbs, some grains. So, in a way I think there's a new humoralism that we could map out if we wanted, of like, what kind of delicious breakfast sludge do you put in your body? Welcome everyone. So we have Michael J. Cohen. I see some folks are joining us in the chat, and he's drawing some new art for Enter the Nostalgitron, and this is going to be totally new. And this is a cereal box cover propaganda ad for Ubun the Ripper, the serpent-born half snake man villain who has kind of had a right-wing populist takeover of the sleepy city of Tranpa Ergola, the place his family has ruled for a long time. The company of worshipful Stillfleeters has sent void miners to investigate. Vex in the chat used to live with someone who made kanji every day, and that's awesome. That's a really good arrangement to have if you have people making you breakfast. So Michael, it seems like as I'm narrating, I'm like doing the technical and color commentary. No, you do the fun stuff. I'll just do the technical commentary here. Seems like what you're doing is sketching a figure. So you're starting with sort of the largest, most dominant figure in the composition. Is that fair to say how you would approach, a full page art?
Yeah. A lot of this is at this point just to make sure that like proportions are going to be correct, and they're not. If you compared this to other art of Ubun so far, I've got a lot of stuff that's way off, but it's sort of there's a meme that's been going around, or at least it's been going around on my social media, and it's probably because it's very targeted, but it's essentially to the tune of like make it first, and then you can fix it afterwards, right? But you have to kind of just start going, and then after you've got your basics, you can start going like, okay, what do I have wrong here? Because I definitely have some stuff wrong here. His head is too big for the body, and his arm is in the wrong spot. But that's where working digitally is the best, because I can just grab his arm and go, okay, well, let's put his arm in the right spot. And then let's grab his head here, because I've kind of got a bit of a bust here of his head and his neck, and it's most definitely it was too big. But I can also start to like really play with the proportions by warping this stuff. But you can already see that that's like way better. Like that actually, oh hey, look at that actually looks like his body. But yeah, a lot of this is just sort of like mapping it. There are a lot of artists who will work just like sort of like they're just kind of putting down what's in their head onto the page. There are other artists that work in a more technical fashion, and that's kind of where I work, is in a bit of a more technical space of like I have a vision in my brain and it is a certain thing, but executing that, like I can't just start putting down the proper lines. There are artists who do it, and they're unbelievable. And I am always in awe of those artists that just go like, these are the lines, and then what they put down is very close to what the final product ends up looking like. For me, it's really, really about like, okay, I gotta, start to put out like a framework, and then from there I can flesh it out. Now I do skip steps, because what you'll see with a lot of stuff is like a lot of artists will, especially when you're doing tutorials and whatever, they'll start in like sort of this space, right, with like a really, really basic, right, and then you start to flesh it out from there. But I after years and years and years of drawing, like you sort of start to learn certain forms by rote, and so you can kind of skip those steps and go, okay, I don't really need to go quite that rudimentary at the beginning.
Right. There's shorthands. I think vernacular or shorthand versions of things people develop in every art, because I can't draw that well. But with writing, it's similarly with an outline. Like, I work with an outline, and for the same reasons you can scale and skew line drawings, is that you can suddenly expand a section of an outline and you didn't screw yourself up because you'd already written like 50 pages or something. You just like add some bullets, and you're like, sick, I added a whole chapter. And there's also vernacular there too. So there's things you skip, or things you're going to do that you don't have to like remind yourself of. And there's other stuff you definitely do want to remind yourself of, because it's the core new big idea that you want to get down and like make sense of. So it's interesting to think how that translates. I mean, just familiar enough with these tools to know what you mean, in terms of like, lassoing little parts of the body and duplicating it or scaling it or whatever. And it's cool to see, at speed, artists do their thing. Yeah, we're having fun just talking about choke slamming it's a scary sounding word, but it is kind of funny to use as like a verb. So we're talking in the chat about that. But Michael, I assume you're too busy drawing to follow the chat.
Oh yeah, I definitely don't. I don't even think I have it open yet. I can. There we go. Now I've got the chat.
Folks, if anyone has questions, I'll try to get Michael to answer them. And yeah, no, Michael, please interrupt me if you're doing something cool and you want to narrate. I'm just filling air time.
No.
One question, I guess, in terms of influences. So we've talked a lot now on a couple of podcast episodes about sort of influences in games. In terms of art, are you? I sort of forget. I mean, to me, a lot of this looks like comic book art to start, at least. Is that sort of one of the primary ways in which you sort of learn to draw and think of yourself as, participating in, or did you also take like fine arts classes in terms of, I don't know, like live drawing? Like how do you get started just like getting your hand-eye stuff, skilled up?
Yeah, I mean, with most of the things that I consider myself a professional in, I did not take any classes. When it comes to my illustration, this is all just years and years and years of making mistakes, and figuring it out on my own. I would say like there are definitely artists who I admire, who I have listened to, and whose sort of tips and tricks I've adapted into my stuff. But in terms of like formal training, I don't have any. So it's I don't necessarily recommend that route. I think that it's the hard way to do it, but it's also I tend to learn by doing. So that's just kind of the way that it's worked out for me, is to just kind of like figure it out as I go. As a kid, I was actually really, really reticent to using technique the way that I do now, because I would see other artists just draw, and I would go like, well, then that's how you're supposed to do it. That's how that works, is that you just draw and it's just perfect. And it's like, well, that person's been drawing for 30 years, and they've perfected a craft, and you're an 8-year-old. So you actually need to learn technique first. But it wasn't until I was like a teenager that I started to actually develop technique so that I could reliably create the things that were in my mind. But in terms of like this project, I would say I there's a lot of comic book influence, but a lot of it is also coming from the source material that we're referencing. So Ninja Turtles is a really, really big part of that. He-Man is another really, really big part of that visually. I would say those are probably the two biggest influences. And that can mean a lot of different things. Both of those franchises have had like just tons of interpretations, but with this one, I'm really trying to keep it accessible and fun and light, but then also have a little bit more of that comic book flair to it, just to keep it in that 80s 90s sort of territory. I got to put my big nipples on Uba, and it's a really, really important part of his character design, in case anybody hasn't figured that one out yet, because it's like when I say He-Man influence, that's what we're talking about. I
almost read them like snake eye, like pasties or something, like an affected piece of armor. He
has 3 overt snakes on him, right? He's got the one on the helmet. He's got the one that'll be here on his little hologram piece, and then he'll have another one here on his belt. But absolutely, his body is meant to be snake-like, right? Like he has the hexagonal, like weird sort of. I did them as hexagons because I wanted it to feel kind of like engineered, like the snake part of him feels like it's not authentic. He doesn't have actual snake scales. It's like it's snake-esque, because they're the far future beings, and they've like perfected their bodies or whatever. And part of the idea is that Ubun himself, I don't think Ubun earned these muscles, right? Like, I don't think that Ubun goes to the gym. I think that Ubun has a machine, or the Nostalgitron itself, that's like, if you've ever seen Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, and you know that he basically like found the concept of those like the things that it's like when they do like your EKG or whatever, right? They're like those.
Yeah, there's like
things,
that,
the electrodes. Yeah, thank you. That you like stick on, and
muscle.
then it would just like make his muscles tense. It would make Bruce Lee's muscles tense, because he was like, as he got more and more into the business side of filmmaking, he was stuck at a desk, and he was like, I don't want to be stuck at a desk all day. I'm losing my muscle mass. I got to figure out. And so he figured out this way around it. And so I see Ubun as like very similar in that, where he's like when he's asleep, there's something that's just like making his muscles twitch and giving him these ridiculous.
Yeah, well, it's nanites, right? I mean, that's the whole thing with the snake men, and thus the Serpentborn have. I mean, this is in the canon of Stillfleet, right? That the snake men, like Vex says, perfection is becoming snake-like. That is this cult of post-humans in the canon of the game, founding the company, who later, much later, will finally. It's like kind of like a thing of like, what if, the most obscure religious cult you'd heard of that had just the most arbitrary, teachings, got the magic genie bottle and like took over. And so I think that's the idea of kind of nanites is this, ultimate ultra MacGuffin for tech. Works really well with biology. So if you know anything about biology, I mean, cells are much bigger than nanoscale machines. So you could sort of assume, well, I don't know, one day they'll figure out medicine where these little, I mean, you say robots, but they're just atoms. They're little squiggly bits that can go in and do things. They're programmed to do things. And so, one of those things, look at like Ozempic today. I mean, there's a lot of like kind of frankly amazing shit that humans have invented in terms of biomedicine. So if you had nanorobots you could program to do all of this stuff and clean up the environment or build cities or whatever, certainly I think there could be some version of make you ripped. So I think it's funny to imagine, because the Serpentborn don't have access to all that tech, and Ubun's whole thing is he somehow, it's never explained, right? But he like gets the Nostalgitron, he gets this piece of a Snake Man ship, that he was like the dark helmet like wimp, and he was like stuck behind the desk of his Serpentborn family, and that only with the really advanced far future time traveling tech, that's how he's now got this body that he didn't have like a week ago, or like I guess a month ago in the story. So I think that's very funny to think of all the propaganda is about a guy who like you've seen walking around, and he was just like the fail son, like he was just like a normal guy who had like kind of weird engineered scaly skin or something, and now he's just this hulking brute. So it's interesting to think about like what aspects of the lore go into like the cartoonified character design, and different ways of sort of squaring that circle. As Wind Up Monkey points out in the chat, this is like, I think Bane, I think a lot of comic book characters have these kinds of MacGuffins where like they have the ability to be ripped without, as you say, like they don't have time in their day to go to the gym because they're either trying to destroy the world or save it. So somehow they need like a thing on the side that just like keeps them ripped. So it's a very interesting, like back to that mythology thing, like, modern take on like, I guess notions of perfection at the end of the day. What's up, Bobby?
I think it's interesting to me because like I think like villains are much more prone to that idea of like of they used magic or they used some sort of shortcut to get there. But then like the X-Men have the Danger Room, right? And the Fantastic Four like do drills and like practice their abilities so that they can do the like and like even in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie, in that first one, like he's got to figure out how to use these powers at the beginning, even though he does magically get to be buff and all of that. But then it's like, I mean, it's one of the best scenes in that movie when he's like, go web go, right? And you're like it's part of the hero's evolution that they however they got their powers, they then have to like grapple with them. But then you never see that with the bad guys. With the bad guys, it's always like they stole it and now they have it, and now they're using it to hurt everybody. So it's one of those things that I think is we don't need to go into detail in it in the book, because it's implied that he's a bad guy. Like, you know, he hasn't done good things to get to where he is, right? Like, but yeah.
Well, it's any sci-fi MacGuffinry, you know, there's like we were saying the other day, there's this infinite regressus of trying to explain it and make sense of it, when the whole point is it's a novum. It's like something that in our real world doesn't work, and you're imagining, well, what if it did, you know? So I think in a way, like, imagining nanoscale robots that can make you make cities and cure diseases is, why not assume that some people are going to use them to look like snake monsters with cool helmets? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't really, it doesn't contradict the like technical assumption there. It's just like, yeah, some people are weird. Like, we know this. Like, these people, a lot of them, it turns out, some of them end up in charge. I don't know. So I think it works to, yeah, as Vex says, they swelled up and look like idiots. That's kind of the whole joke about, you know, Ubun's whole game plan here. So here's this kind of loincloth, I guess, inspiration, which feels to me very He-Man. The idea that it's a lot of ripped people and sort of fancy adult diapers, right, is the look. Not to, I mean, it's not, and you know, there are cultures where people wear different things. I don't mean to knock that. It's more just like the inspiration seems to be science fantasy, like Vancian fantasy, but then for some reason everyone's almost naked. And I think it had to do with just the toys, like how they molded the legs. Like, they wanted to give these massive thighs. No one's like wearing pants.
It would, well, with He-Man, it's all very Frazetta, right? So it's all inspired by Conan the Barbarian and sort of that world of like Crom and those types of characters. But Skeletor specifically has this sort of like there's a word for it. I mean, it's either Greek or Roman style of armor, which is like these flaps that go over top of the tunics and whatever to I think like the idea with it was that it, like, because most of what they're dealing with is arrows, right? Like, it's arrows and spears and stuff like that. So having things hanging off of your body made it sort of like obfuscated your silhouette. Like, it made it harder to know, like, am I going to hit you in the right spot here? Right. And like, the more stuff was sort of like flailing around, the harder it was to figure out how do I actually like hurt this person. But then when you get to it being, you know, interpreted for He-Man characters, it's just what looks cool, right? The practicality of it is out the window. But
right. Well, yeah, and it's interesting. I was just looking up some of the armor that Skeletor has worn, and it does vary. But I think it's interesting. It's an ahistorical mix of like, banded mail and like plate mail, but a lot of open areas that wouldn't help you in battle, but I think makes you look goth, because I think a lot of these things were happening at the same time that like The Crow and like Nine Inch Nails, the very, you know, the first album, like there's things happening that we're not, you and I are just too young to have been like teens for. So we were like younger kids. And so the things being sold to us were like beginning to, maybe, I'm guessing this is a hypothesis that's probably testable by research, but you know, some of that stuff gets metabolized into like, I don't know, they're all in like strappy leather clothes and like with little skulls everywhere, because it kind of cues up villain. I guess it's a comic book thing too, right? Throughout sort of the history of pulpy characters and even before modern comics. But it does get pretty extreme with these toys, because all the toys, looking at them again, are kind of naked with little loincloths. And then you're right that there might be some armor, but the armor is mostly like football style, like shoulder armor. And it's
the harnesses.
It's like they would only be hitting each other on the shoulder or the crotch or something, which is, you know, again, it's okay. It's, you know, that's how Eternia works, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of that comes out of like, is that like there's the Conan influence, but there's also a lot of John Carter, the Princess of Mars and Barsoom stuff. That one of the things that movie got really, really right was that costume design for the male characters, at least. I know, man. Listen, Princess of Mars is super problematic. Edgar Rice Burroughs was doing some stuff, and I had some ideas that I think we would all agree in a modern era are not great. But but he really, like, in that book, really describes the idea of the harnesses and like the armor. It's actually like really central to several plot points in the first couple of books, because it represents different things. And I think, like, because John Carter is really foundational to a lot of the stuff that would become sort of sci-fi fantasy, like He-Man, that you see that influence a lot, like across the board. I mean, even into a character like Darth Vader, which this is also reminiscent of. Like, he's got the samurai helmet, right? I've got the sort of like that same silhouette with the helmet, and then I've added like Gundam, like the horns on the front of it, and then the snake motif, which is all actually also referencing into like Mum-Ra as a character, but that's very Darth Vader. And then if you look at Vader's costume design, he's samurai, but then he does have a harness, because he has the chest plate in the middle, and it is like cinched onto him under the like sort of above his abs and under the armpit and that, and then over top, but a lot of it's like obscured by the cape. So you don't, and he's got a tunic over it as well, but he does have that in his character design. And that is like, that's stuff that when I look at it, I go like, that's where it's coming from, is really from that John Carter stuff. Because those character designs were like, I think, again, like foundational, because I think that stuff also ends up influencing Conan a lot as well. And the Frazetta stuff, which is like sort of the most iconic Conan the Barbarian stuff. And when you look at the He-Man box art for the toys, the He-Man box art for the toys is very Frazetta, right? Like it you could take any of that and airbrush it on the side of a van, and you'd be good to go. But
this is Frank Frazetta,
yeah,
the fantasy and science fiction artist, who is very active in, I want to say 30s, 40s was the beginning, but really famous in the 40s through the 60s. Yeah, so had a long storied career. So you're sort of talking a little bit about the history of design of kind of pulp archetypes, which we're playing with. We don't normally spend as much time thinking about it in the same way with Stillfleet, but for this book, because it's a parody, right? It's definitely a satire. It's definitely taking these elements and doing different things with them. So I think here, the goal was to really mine very specific influences, but it's interesting to think about how those influences. So like you're saying, He-Man, to recap, is influenced by this earlier generation of artists. And especially, the stuff that rises to the top and gets made into movies over and over again and metabolized in a different way in all the B movies, all the ripoffs. But, Conan, Tarzan. So these sort of orientalized versions of masculinity, where it's kind of like half naked white dude with long hair in like a loincloth with a sword or something. And there's sort of versions of that are in American pop culture from at least the 30s on. And still today, I would argue it sort of just feeds pretty directly into the real, I don't know if it really hockey sticks or whatever with Marvel. So it's interesting to think about how and when that stuff changes. I don't know. There's probably some really good gender studies dissertation or cultural studies, dissertation on like when dudes started drawing dudes like this, with like thighs that are so big you wouldn't really be able to move. Because that's like, I always think of the He-Man toys now. It's like they only move because they don't actually have like muscles that have to do anatomy things. They just have like, they can do the things that their plastic bodies allow. In a different version of this book, we take it like a different level, and maybe that's more Blister Critters, I guess, thinking of it out loud. But making like villains and heroes who are plastic and move because they're articulated with little metal, connectors. But here we're still in the diegetic world, the world of game. It's like meat dudes, Avi points out Frazetta's Lord of the Rings illustrations are amazing. Basically, not a single person is wearing pants. Again, there was a real. I think maybe Frazetta was just like a swinger who just like hated pants, And just like was like, why, if I don't, if I can imagine anything, I can imagine a fantasy universe, then just nobody has to wear pants. We're all more comfortable. We're all in, skirts, basically. It's fine.
I think there's a phenomenon that happens with artists, and why comic books are the way that they are, and a lot of like sort of like pop art illustrators end up doing stuff the way that they do it, which is like you start with life drawing, and if you get really good at it or you get really enamored with it, then you just kind of don't move on from it. And so especially if you're doing something like a comic book where you've got, I got to do 24 pages in a month, every month in perpetuity in order to keep a job, you are looking for shortcuts. And so having everybody in skin tight spandex is a really easy way to never have to draw fabric, which is very time consuming. So it's much quicker because you're gonna, most of the time you're gonna do this part anyways, right? You're gonna do the or at least you're thinking about the body underneath the armor or the clothing when you're doing superhero stuff or whatever. And it's like, well, let's just not put them in any clothes, because then we're done, right? And we'll just put slap an S on his chest and put him in some underpants and make him look like a strong man. And a cape is a really easy piece of fabric to do, right? You just kind of like flowing lines and you're done. But
there's things that are more forgiving or not, things that are easier or not. So it's interesting thinking of that era evolving into the era of Photoshop, and now rapidly, not what we do, big disclaimer, but generative AI and how those might affect. I mean, it's already affecting, like common images, tropes that we see. But that's a really good point about like why they're drawing their life drawing class models over and over again in the comics, because it's easier and they can get paid more. It's like more fun for them to do other things.
Yeah. But I think, like, I mean, with Frazetta, I think Frazetta was just very enamored with the human form, and like, I don't think that it was a gendered preference either. Like, he drew his men as rippling and muscular as possible, and his women were equally voluptuous and had a lot of dimension to them. So like that was a guy that I think was just really like enamored with musculature, because his dragons and stuff are also like, they're always shredded, right? Like if you see his Smaug, it's like the muscles on top of muscles, and then scales covering it. But so I'm trying to see, I'm character designing on the fly here, because with Ubin it's easy. I've drawn him probably about like 10 times at this point, but with whoever this Space Marine is, we're creating a nondescript like a fleeter, or like just some sort of, I don't know, like I want to be like kind of paramilitary-esque but futuristic. He has to look tough, but he also has to look like Ubin is beating the crap out of him, right? Because it's the propaganda. He can't look like Ubin wouldn't beat up a weakling in his propaganda stuff. He'd only be fighting strong guys. But
but there has to be an element of like, I mean, if we're this can get dark real fast, but just to summarize my understanding of like the history is that a lot of fascist propaganda is simultaneously about projecting power, but also like reinforcing this humiliation narrative. And so it's kind of like, oh no, the other, the scapegoat, is oppressing us, the right-wing people, but also at the same time we're stronger than them. And so it's interesting how that gets like balanced in different contexts. And obviously there's different like the history of poster art, there's different approaches to propaganda even in the same war from different powers. And that's one way that it's studied. Like the kind of Norman Rockwell like Americana appeal in World War II is very different than some of that like sort of Nazi like 19th century whatever Wagnerian kind of mythology stuff. But it also is a little bit similar in that some of it is sort of soft and about like appealing to culture, and trying to show like positives about the culture. So it's interesting to think about what like an imaginary sci-fi villain would do. And I think Michael, your insistence that it always is about cereal. Like this guy's just obsessed with like his misread, not only like broadly like Saturday morning cartoons and like He-Man kind of action figures, but very specifically also this food that's associated with them. Like it's like correlation causation problem. You know, it's like sharks causing ice cream. And so now he's obsessed with specifically sugary cereal. I think adds like a really good note of just like, that's fucking weird, you know, hilarity to what could be kind of dark if you really think about it. Like, oh, like snake guys who like get really powerful and take over. Oh, well, that could be really, that is just like messed up, you know. So I do think the Enter the Nostalgitron vibe of like, yeah, but it is ultimately very silly. Like it's pretty far on the zany meter towards zany. The cereal bit helps. So I love the idea that this would be a box of cereal he would somehow get produced like artisanally in the city he controls, that like is not industrial, but he like they're making a cereal factory for him that has this on it. It's like a really, if you think through the logic of it, you're like, that's like a really weird, insane thing for a tyrant to do. Like, now you make me colorful flakes of corn or whatever. I don't even think we decided what the cereal looks like. I don't know if in your mind it's very clear, but
it is actually. We can see an example of it if I bring up our profile pictures that I did of Yumi and Jed. You can see that it's like gray sludge. that Honey Bunches of Gunch, mine has marshmallow bits in it, but but it's also when we see the slurps, if I were to go back and redo those illustrations right now, I would use the same colors that I've got here, because I had done those pretty early on, but I would use this more like milky blue. Like that's kind of the idea here with the slurps, is that they are consisting mostly of milk sludge. So as I always joke, if you've ever like left a bowl of cereal for too long and it starts to turn into almost like a rubbery substance, it once all the water starts to evaporate from it, you just kind of end up with like the gross sludge. And that's sort of like the basis of the slurps. And I would use like a really similar thing now of like, that's what I don't want the cereal to look good. I think I want it to look like something that like he has very clearly misunderstood what you know, because he doesn't ever get to experience actual cereal. He's just watching commercials about it. And then as we've sort of written in the book, he's using the things that he has at his disposal, and this is primarily like a fishing village, so it's a lot of like it's fish paste that's being turned into cereal flakes, as opposed to it being corn, right? Like, because most cereal is either going to be oat or corn based, and so he's working from a fish base, and so the end product is not super appealing to look at or eat, but it's just been like overloaded with sugar and gunch to the point where like you start eating it, you get addicted to it.
So it's like,
or not.
It's like it's like fish bones that are fried to make like a kind of cornmeal that's reconstituted to make the chips. So it's probably not very fishy, but it still might have that mild kind of umami. And then it's got like basically sugar and like a synthetic opioid that his Hulk 3D prints, and that produces this gray sludge with a kind of bluish tinge. Well, that's perfectly dystopian, Michael. So I think you nailed the brief on, you know, the horrors of the morning meal.
I think one of the funny things that we've discussed in talking about you know, the cereal and the gunch and everything, like it literally just started as a joke of like, we should call it Honey Bunches of Gunch, because that just sounds funny. But then when that turns into like, okay, well, this is actually like an idea that we now have to like put into the book, and you start thinking about it being this thing of like he's using it to kind of control people to a certain degree, because it's, you know, it's nobody's allowed to eat anything else in the city. They have to eat Honey Bunches of Gunch, and cereal that he's manufacturing. But there's a really great video on TikTok of this girl that's like, I shouldn't say girl, I should say woman, but this woman that's like, so what do you want to you just want people to like have places to live and have food? And it's like, yeah, I do. That is what I want. And I hear that and I think of Ubun and the way that he's thinking of himself, which is that like he's sitting up in the Nostalgitron as a detached weirdo dictator would, and he's like, I'm doing a good job. This is a good thing that I'm doing for these people. They don't know it because they're all idiots, and I'm the only one who's smart. But they should be thankful. They should be grateful because I'm giving them. They have food. They have a place to live. They don't have to like worry about anything. Like I'm doing. So he's like seeing himself as almost like from like a socialist perspective of like, he's like, I'm making life easier. All they have to do is swear fealty to me, and then go through the Nostalgitron when I'm bored. And it's like, well, but people don't want to do that, and you're also pumping them full of opioids that are making it difficult for them to fight in a Nostalgitron. Or like
whatever other police actions the slurps enforce. I mean, it's kind of again the classic. I think it highlights the fact that the bad guys always think they're doing something good, right? And I think that to the degree this is any sort of satire of anything in the present moment, it's like the dissonances between the things they're saying and the things they're doing, and that it's pretty obvious if you're like, well, you said you were gonna, improve some situation and you're making everything worse, then there's a huge gap there. And like, this guy has this like incredibly advanced sky palace floating over the city and has decided to do all of these incredibly dumb things. And so, it's sort of like, I think the other part of the joke that is again very dark is that some people in the city are really into it and they're not being forced to. They just are again like, oh, this guy's cool, this guy's strong, whatever. He's based, and I think that joke, we don't go into very much in the book, so there's not like a ton of like this is propagandistic as it gets, is this one page art, but we do sort of imply that like it's not like the city has had any kind of real revolution. In a way, that's where we're asking the players to decide what they want to do. So they show up and they can read the room and figure out whether they're going to fight Ubun or steal from Ubun or whatever they're going to try to do. So it's meant to be a fairly, like, in that sense, straightforward, like Stillfleet story, but taken in this just completely bizarre visual world, which I'm very much enjoying, just to narrate what you're doing here, outlining this hapless Space Marine-esque guy getting choked out.
I mean, this guy, he has the helmet especially has turned into very much Power Rangers type of helmet, but I think like that just kind of adds to the Saturday morning goofiness of it. But now I'm at the point of like, okay, I have these two guys mapped out and I'm pretty happy with that, but I have to figure out the logic of how this how we're interacting. That's why I've done this they're on two separate layers, and I've done the layers in different colors because I want to be able to I'm actually going to move Ubin above because his stuff is kind of going to be over top of, but now I have to like actually figure out the logic of where the hand is and how that is interacting with the rest of this character's
so there's like blocking
in real
and there's
space,
a couple levels of that, of like detailing, and then there's some cleanup, and I'm gonna guess hands usually are more part of cleanup because they're harder. Is that usually you can just sort of draw a ball and then later figure out where the fingers go?
You definitely always start with hands as like like very, very rough. So this is the thing, is that I don't know if I've got angles in here correct, because I want this shoulder to be behind the arm because I want Ubin's arm to be here, but I'm just trying to create some depth here, but I'm just trying to think about like what elements are in front. I've also, if you look at it, there's also a little bit of a trick of the scale here that, and I'm going to hand wave it away by saying that Ubin would want himself to be much bigger on the box than the dude that he's messing up. So I think I can actually play with that a little bit and just get this.
Yeah, and as Taylor summarizes, this is the part where you figure out how does meat overlap. You know, how does hand meat overlap with neck meat in this case, in a satisfying way.
It's super easy to draw one character. It gets really complicated when you then have to have two characters that interact, or three characters, or characters and objects all interacting. But it's okay, because this is it's cartoony and it's cereal box art, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to make actual sense. It just has to read properly.
Yeah. Can we also talk about the hands? I feel like you've done this with a couple of the illustrations where the characters in danger do this thing that I associate with my cats, where they kind of like raise their hackles a bit. And it feels very classic cartoon. You know, it feels almost like Sunday 4-panel strip, comic, sort of indicator of like fright and anxiety.
This sort of like three chunk formation. This is the Disney influence. That's what that is, because when you draw a Disney hand, when you're drawing like Mickey Mouse's hand, this is how you do it. You just kind of like, you do your ball, and then you can get, your fingers in there. He's only got 3 fingers. And then you put a thumb in there, right? That's how Mickey Mouse's hand is usually drawn, and then he's got his glove or whatever, and then a simple arm, right? So if you look at a lot of Mickey Mouse illustrations, a lot of Disney illustrations, that's what you're going to get. When you start getting into more complicated stuff, you're just like separating out those elements, but they're staying like very close together. So if we have 4 fingers, then I'm kind of chunking them into three things. But it's also actually really common how we hold our hands. So our pinkies tend to stick out a little bit, and our index and ring finger tend to stick together. And then our sorry, not our index, our middle finger and our ring finger tend to stick together. And then our index finger is kind of independent. It's the most versatile of our finger digits, and then you have your thumb, right? And it's because we've evolved. Evolutionary pressure has made pinching with these 2 things really, really easy. It's really hard to pinch with these. Like you can pick things up with these 2 fingers, but it's harder to pick things up with these, especially with your pinky. And I'm sure that there are reasons that, like, climbing trees and grabbing fruit and twisting them off of, branches and stuff like that was a lot easier with all of these things in mind. But
I think choke slamming, that was a huge
choke slamming is a big part
selection,
of it.
among hominins. Yeah.
But it means that, like, if you look at the way that people like will naturally hold a hand when it's neutral, when you're young and you're starting out in art, you will draw a fist. A lot of the time you will just draw a fist, because it's really easy to just make a chunk and to draw a fist. And then you'll do hands, and your hands will be like this. They'll just be like a claw, right? But when we actually like hold our hands neutral, we tend to like sort of like fall into that 3 chunk structure. And it's really funny, because that's Spider-Man's thing, is into those 3. But yeah, so this hand structure of like the raised index finger, and then these 2 together, and then the pinky out, and that sort of like reaching around thumb, it's just, honestly, it's laziness. No,
it's not a criticism.
It's you get used to certain structures and certain forms, and then yeah, like that. Those are the things that become your style, right? That's because people when they're starting out in art, especially like teenagers, when they're like, I'm going to be an artist, I'm going to be an illustrator, I'm going to be a comic book artist, they start talking about like, oh, how do you develop your style? I get this question a lot from kids. It's like, how did you develop your style? And it's like, well, I did things for a really long time and eventually figured out what worked for me. And you find things that are comfortable, that look good, that look the way that you want them to. And then you start blending them together, and that's how you end up developing style.
Right. But also you're also copying specific things, and as you say, like over time, some of them become second nature or evolve, and they're your own. Some of them are kind of one-to-one with the inspiration, but they're removed from that context. So the Mickey Mouse hands are on the Space Marine, and it's not an animation, and it's not an animal, you know, blah blah blah. So
Yeah.
it sort of becomes its own thing, but that influence lingers of just how you're thinking about like anxiety hands means that you kind of have this happen,
Yeah.
and it's easy to draw and satisfying to look at. You know, it kind of reads. It's interesting because I think again that's very parallel with writing. With you develop your major influences, you just try to write things exactly like that, and over time you forget the copying, and it just becomes second nature to write a title of a thing that sounds like, you know, it's Calvino or so, right? It just becomes like second nature. But it's because you spend a whole bunch of time trying to analyze, like, man, how did, you know, why does this slap so hard? You know, to put it in modern terms.
So I'm really quickly just doing this. This would be Ubun's hand, right? And Ubun's hand is quite different. And the reason for that is that like his hand is monstrous, right? So I often draw him with this, his hands in this pose, and it's almost everything that I just said about how we naturally hold our hands. He's doing something else entirely, and this is not a conscious thing that I've been doing. It's a thing that now that we're talking about it, I'm going like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I've kind of been doing that with Ubin. This I would call this hand pose, like this is a monologuing hand, right? And that's why he's often doing it. So it's either like he's holding it behind his head, or it's like in front of him. It's a very Darth Vader,
or like a delicious
well.
I love this meal, you know, satisfied hand.
And he's but there's two reasons to do that. It's I want to really accentuate that he's got the claws, because that was a piece that when we were developing the character, that was really your only piece of feedback on him. When I sent you the first, well, not the first one, the first version of Ubin is very different, and maybe I'll show that one day, but he's not very good. But the when I kind of landed on this design and I sent you the illustration, the first and really only piece of feedback I think that you gave, critical feedback. You gave a lot of like, I really like that. but the only thing that you were like, could we try this, is like, you were like, can we make his hands more, I think you even said monster like could they be more like claws, just to really like sell this is the bad guy, right? And I so since that point, it's like, well, I always have to make sure that his hands are very noticeable, that you can see those claws, you can see the ends of the fingers. Because if I balled his hand into a fist, the claws would be hidden. All you would see is the claw and the thumb, right? So Ubin never has his hands. He never has a closed fist. It's always sort of like, and again, it's another snake structure, right? He's always got the two fingers, those two fingers out, and it is like that. If you wanted to like mimic a snake bite, that's what you would do, is you would put your fingers out like that. So it's funny how some of these things just come out naturally, but that is also just decades of drawing comic book characters, and I'm not even thinking about it half of the time. I'm just going like, how do I my wife will tell you, she'll be watching me draw, and actually it's happened a couple of times at the shows that I've been at recently, comic shows. I'll be drawing and I'll do stuff like I'll be over my iPad like I am right now, and I'll just like start doing things like my hand will start like turning into the claw, and to anybody observing, I look like I'm having like weird spasms, or like my face will start to twitch, and it's because I'm thinking of like, I probably did it actually when I was drawing this mouth. If you went back into the recording, you probably see me like grimace at one point or another, because I'm like trying to figure out like, what does that look like? What does it look like when somebody is like, right, like and or like, what does my hand look like when I do that? And you'll see videos and stuff like that, Disney behind the scenes things of animators constantly looking in a mirror. A lot of animators will have a mirror at their desk, and they'll be looking at it to like figure out the lines and stuff like that, in order to figure out a pose. But yeah, it's you just kind of, sometimes some of these things you're just kind of feeling out. You just kind of, that's the best way to do it, is to just kind of go based on the vibe. that's the modern nomenclature that we would use. I am actually pretty happy with a lot of this. I'm gonna do a funny thing here where I'm gonna have his cape it's actually in other illustrations, it's not this long, but for this one it will be.
Yeah, this is like ceremonial battle dress, right? This is the propaganda poster on the cereal box. It's not actually him in the that's where we have to keep straight the levels of diegesis, right? Like this is art in the game as opposed to representing the game realistically. Which is always fun to have that discussion with every illustrator ever. I feel like when you do sci-fi is like, you know, how realistic, and it's like, well, I remember at some point Ethan was like, so you want me to draw a cloud of things that are so small they're invisible and they could do anything and they could be any color and they could just be invisible. I was like, yeah, draw that. Draw that.
Yeah, what is that? What does that look like? Show me what that looks like. Show me what this thing that I described as being impossible to perceive.
Exactly.
What does it look like?
It's a color you can't perceive. Choose a color, and it's like, obviously that's a kind of, you know, it's like Worst Client Ever meets like Zen Koan, right? But there's got to be a way to translate it into some sort of visual, you know, visual shorthand, so that we sort of know what you mean. It's funny, someone was posting in the server I just saw on Twitter today, somebody posted about Wayne Douglas Barlow, and Ben reposted the tweet in the Stillfleet server, and he's had such a profound impact on me because I grew up reading my dad's old beaten up like paperback copies of all the classic sci-fi, and he did a lot of the covers, and I didn't know who he was. And then later in high school I got a couple books, these hardback small books that had all of his art, basically like all the fantasy art and all the sci-fi art, and then found that he'd done a couple of his own books which were pretty sparse on writing, but the world building and stuff's great, and it's mostly these gorgeous, you know, oil paintings wherever they are. But yeah, it's funny to think about those influences, because his whole thing, which has been so influential on me, was like what I now call speculative ecology. It's like not just any one alien or demon or whatever. It's like what is the world around them? Like imagine painting the camera, but it's like oil paintings. So anyway, it's just funny to think about, like, I don't know. I haven't thought of that guy's name in years. I haven't thought of Frank Frazetta either, and it's obviously he's important in SF broadly, but
yeah.
If you'd asked me his name, I would have been like, yeah, I know, like, I don't remember the guy's name, you know? But now that we're talking about it, it's like, yeah, it's hard to escape the impact of some of these people who made whatever decisions. And I was Googling around, and it seems like it's unsettled as to, you know, I don't know, like basically his thoughts on things, including like sex, and even, you know, like we were talking about wrestling and bodybuilding, and like the influence of those on him. And it's unclear, you know? So maybe again, someone's looked into it more than just, you know, Googling the first couple blog posts that come up. But it's funny to think how that becomes, you know, some random influence becomes like, oh, that's just how that looks, right? That's just how, you know, heroes and villains, they're all, you know, in loincloths. So to jump back in the illustration, we have the figures are pretty far along, I would say, in terms of the line work, right? They look pretty good. And you still have just two layers. It's really just two figures that you're
at the moment
refining.
Yeah. And right now it's just because I'm, you know, I might need to move something around or manipulate something a little bit more. So I'll keep it as the two layers, but pretty soon I will merge these two into one as the sketch layer. And then we start getting into, and actually, what do we got? We got like 15 minutes left. So
yeah, we can go a little long if you want. Also, Taylor has a question when you get a chance, but please finish your thought, and I will ask the question.
Oh, yeah. I just we're almost at that point where I'll start to ink this in. But I'm actually I think I am pretty happy with that. So obviously, there's a lot of space down. Where's my pen? There we go. Down in this area, but remember, it's a cereal box, so there will be
a
spoon and cereal and all of that
in here. This
and then we need room for the logo at the top. So
right, and we both think, I think a lot about this is the composition in terms of it's an ad, right? Ultimately, it's not just graphic design for like artsy movie poster. It's not the local orchestra. This is an ad to appeal to children. Even though it's Ubun forcing, you know, early moderns to make this for him for kind of no reason. Like the thing that he is referencing from the Nostalgitron that he's stolen from the future, from the past, is specifically, you know, the ads. So I think that's interesting that you've gone ahead and composed it that way, right? So the composition is mostly two dudes fighting, with the idea that there's going to be tons of room around them for kind of traditional ad crap, chirons and big expressive type, and probably like you have that product shard. So a bowl full of cereal is on the cereal box, so you couldn't possibly mistake like what is inside. Meanwhile, while you're setting up some more layers, Taylor has a question. Michael, who were some of your keystone influences, and whose art have you been inspired by recently? Good questions.
Yeah. So we talked about this a lot on the podcast. And it starts with Disney stuff. It starts with like Disney Afternoon and all those types of characters. Darkwing Duck was my favorite. And so Tad Stones, who created Darkwing Duck, but who was also one of the key creatives on Chip and Dale, and I believe worked on DuckTales prior to that. And like, so the look and feel of a lot of that Disney Afternoon stuff, like even Gummy Bears, I think he worked on, it all like there's a reason why it's all kind of like on brand, right? Like all on point with one another. So that's where I would have started. Sonic the Hedgehog then comes in like second grade as like the coolest character ever. And so there was a lot of me drawing Sonic the Hedgehog. There was an artist, Patrick Spazianti, who was the cover artist for Sonic for a really long time. And he would do these ridiculously detailed covers for what inside would be like very cartoony, like Saturday morning cartoon style art. So like there was a really big juxtaposition. You pick up the cover and you'd be like, this is so rad. And then you'd open it and you'd be like, this is all right. But the writing on those comics was great at the, like for, the age that I was, around, 7 to 12 years old. I was like, these are the best comics ever. When I was a teenager, I started getting into some of the more like independent stuff. Not really that independent at the time, but the beginning of Image, I guess technically the second wave of Image, which is when they did all the cliffhanger stuff. So that's Humberto Ramos, Joe Madureira, and J. Scott Campbell are kind of the big three for that for cliffhanger. But Humberto Ramos was the one that I attached to the most. And there's a book that he did with Brian Augustine called Crimson that is hands down my favorite comic book of all time, and that'll never change. And when I get the question of like, if there was one property that you could adapt for, a movie or animated series or video game, whatever, like into any other genre, there's one property that I could do, it would be Crimson. It's vampires, but it's vampires and werewolves and stuff with a very like Christian mythology overlay on it. So there's like angels and dragons, but it's like the dragons are brought in via like Saint George, the dragon slayer. So it's all Christian mythology based, but around this like really cool goth vampire type story. And then Humberto Ramos, his style is I believe he's Mexican. It's very like street art, sort of like very graffiti-esque. So a lot of like the poses and stuff like that I do are very influenced by him. Because there was a lot of me like trying to emulate the way that he would draw. And his poses, like his body poses were super, super expressive. Taylor Z says he draws a mean Spider-Man, and that is 1,000% correct. When he got tapped and brought onto Spider-Man, because he had been more in like the Image sort of indie comic scene, and then he got brought onto Spider-Man, it was like a dream come true for me, because I was like, this is who this guy should be drawing forever. But and he still is. He's still drawing Spider-Man comics now. So that's a really big influence on me. But then I discovered I guess it's three things sort of like really close together. Adventure Time, and Penn Ward, his style, which I started trying to emulate some of his stuff, trying to do some of his like more like weird out there, very cartoony stuff, and figuring out like the sort of simplified forms. Although like when you look at Adventure Time, it on the surface looks very simple, but you really need a good grasp of the fundamentals in order to pull it off, in order to do it as well as they did it. And then around the same time that I discovered Adventure Time, like maybe within a year of that, was Brian Lee O'Malley with Scott Pilgrim, which became a massive influence on me. Because if you look at a lot of the stuff that I do for my, Star Wars, when I do Inktober and every October, and I do all my Star Wars characters, proportionally it's very Scott Pilgrim-esque. And then the third piece that came in there is Gravity Falls, and I can't the name of somebody in the chat will probably know off the top of their head, but the lead artist on that, maybe is it Alex Hirsch? That might be it. But that style was another one that I was like, oh, that's really cool. I would really like to figure out how that works, and started sort of like dissecting that. Yeah, Alex Hirsch. Yeah, and so I think a lot of the stuff that I do now is very much that Penn Ward, Brian Lee O'Malley, and Alex Hirsch sort of all mixed together. But then when I'm doing a project like this, the Humberto Ramos starts to come back out, and with certain characters, that Disney stuff starts to come back out. Because if you look at Le Guin, Le Guin's legs are gargoyle legs. Like Le Guin is a gargoyle from the waist down, and even has like gargoyle like sort of hands, because they like gargoyles was very, because it was animated, so it's like we don't have a lot of time to draw this stuff. So that is a foot. That is also fingers. That is like, that's it on the dog. Oh, look, that's Bronx. But then if we want it to be Goliath, then we just do that, right? And then he's got like his but if it's his hand, then we just give him a thumb and we do that. And it's like that they just like perfected that really like simple style of like the monster hands.
Almost like medieval drawing, where it's like it's so
totally
shitty that you're like, maybe they weren't like, they had a different concept of like good art than we do. You know what I mean?
Like, so I like that stuff started coming back into this, but the Humberto Ramos stuff also really started to come back into this, along with like, when you look at Ubun, there's a little bit of Joe Madureira influence in there because he's got muscles on top of muscles. Ed McGuinness as well is another one, because Ed McGuinness would draw, he drew Superman for a long time, and he would draw Superman with just like these big round muscles. And his style is one of the ones that I've always really, really loved. So that's the whirlwind tour of my influences.
Those are a lot of names. I assume people who know illustrators will know a lot of those names. It looks like Wind Up Monkey points out Ed McGuinness and Art Adams live in the same style. And Gargoyles, I think we've talked about this. Gargoyles is a huge influence on me as well, for not for the art really. I mean, not to hate on it, just it is, it's simple, it was effective. But for the story, which I thought was just so cool, the mashup of the kind of modern, in a way, I think ex post facto, but kind of leveraging that Bronx is Burning, New York grittiness with Macbeth and Shakespeare, and also sci-fi and time travel. And it was super cool. It was mind blowing as a kid that you could have a kind of serious cartoon. That was probably one of the first ones, along with some anime, that I remember being like, oh yeah, this is much more like I'm engaged now. I would say because of the stakes. I don't think at the time I could have articulated it that way, but like that show, man, I really wanted to know what happened. I really cared about the characters, in a way that I just didn't with He-Man and all those other G.I. Joe, all that stuff was just like, I mean, they're not even really trying to shoot each other. They're shooting over each other's heads. Like nothing ever changes. It's more sitcom in a way than action.
Yeah, but Gargoyles has the episode where Broadway accidentally shoots Eliza, right? Like there's a gun safety episode in that, whereas like most shows at that time, guns were like a no-go, and then here's Gargoyles,
right? Realistic guns, right?
Like this is a gun with bullets. This is a police officer's gun with bullets in it. It's not like on X-Men or Spider-Man where they gave them inexplicable lasers. but yeah, that show made, I think it didn't feel like we were being talked down to.
Right. No, exactly. And I think that's where there's always a sort of censorship that happens in society, which, you know, you could argue is there's some positive to it, but trying to keep certain images away from kids or, you know, consider them or whatever. But usually that stuff comes off as super corny, but I don't remember, I haven't watched Gargoyles in years and years, but I don't remember it feeling as corny as most of the other sort of very obvious PSAs that would be in, certainly like G.I. Joe, but also all the more low budget ones like COPS, that's an acronym, or Wildcats or whatever, that are just like, you know, they were just sort of all about, I think, to the heart of Nostalgitron, like selling a figurine, and there was no real there with the writing. Cool skull. Just gonna say, you're also good at this sort of fast, like not using a lot of lines. Okay, that's clearly a scary, you know, beast skull, which, you know, again feels very Frazada. Like just random beast skulls were like a major component of the economy of wherever Conan lived. Hyperborea, right? Yeah, Hyperborean's real into just animal skull stuff.
It's the double purpose of this part of the design, right? Because it's like, obviously the He-Man Frazetta part of it is very like, ornate skulls on everything, because Skeletor's got a motif that he's got to keep going, which is very much where Ubin is getting that from, is from the Skeletor component of it, of like it's very important that people understand what I'm about, and that's skeletons.
Right.
But with Ubin, it's the snake thing. He's like, oh yeah, this is, I imagine that he was watching these cartoons and he was like, how many of these dudes have snake stuff? And I'm like snake stuff. So clearly that's why, you know, these guys are all rad and I want to be just like
right. But I have to say, it's also obviously a Kabuto with Mempo, which is, you know, where Shredder, like all of these influences are coming from somewhere, and a lot of it is an orientalization or like reappropriation of like different real things that were from wildly different times and spaces, which here makes a lot of sense because this guy's an asshole who is literally misunderstanding his later descendants' advanced technology that has unearthed, has just caught all these transmissions, you know, from Earth from millions of years ago and decoded them. So it's kind of like many levels of misunderstanding. But in terms of the art history, I mean, it is, thinking about it now, it is obvious that a lot of these villains, it may go back to the conversation around armor. They're taking armor from different cultures at different times and just like copying, pasting them, which is a way to make cool, satisfying art, like for sure. You know what I mean? Like you take a bit here, a shape there, and you put it together and it's interesting and different. But you know, these helmets, now that I think about it, are straight up just like, you know, that Rococo phase of early modern Japan, where it's like, I don't know, I'm going to put a demon skull on my face and, you know, that'll be pretty scary. And, you know, sure enough, it's pretty scary. It's pretty cool. We got some cube news in the chat. Shout out to cubes, other shapes. I was reading about cool things related to Cantor dust and like infinitely spongy shapes and how you can program those and ways that we study them. Very different than drawing triangles and skulls, but also cool. Michael, we're going to have to wrap up soon-ish, so we can go a little over. But I think one question just from the sort of like, you know, you're in the middle of drawing a thing perspective is that occurs to me is like, how long do these drawings take you to finish, and what finishing even means? Like I'm guessing, this is me, and you can correct me on all this, that there's a moment when you're going to be inking, which digitally might mean selecting a bunch of areas and coloring them one color. But what else happens? You know, how do you move from this stage of like really nice drawing to, okay, it's a finished piece of art and you're ready to upload it and, you know, print it?
Yeah, I mean, with this project and where we're at with it right now, time is a really big component of that. Imposing deadlines on myself and saying like, you just gotta consider this done. I think my video is glitching out a little bit.
Yeah, it's looking really funny. I don't know if we're getting hacked by the, you know, snake people, but
I said that the serial people.
Oh, big serial.
Yeah, they've shut my camera
for
off.
Sure.
They've shut down my camera. Anyways, it doesn't matter. You guys don't need to be able to see me. You need to be able to see my drawings. Yeah, I mean, like I am at the point now where I would like this is inking, right? So I'm doing line art, and I can already tell that helmet's not quite right. But I'll goof with a lot of this, and I like clean it up. It's a lot like editing in writing or video editing, where it's like the every one of these passes is another opportunity to clean stuff up and fix things and and figure out, what's wrong and that sort of thing. I think I have 3 different perspectives going on with this helmet right now. Like I've got a perspective here, and then a different one here, and then his chin is kind of, actually it's probably 4, because then that's coming down like that. Like I need to clean that up. The sketch was not quite clear enough. The sketch is where I will spend the majority of the time, and after we go offline, I will go back into the sketch, and I will probably clean up the sketch a lot more than I have before I go in and continue doing the ink. I just wanted to kind of get started on that so that people could see a little bit of that process and not just the sketching. But after this point would be, I'll put another layer, and we would start going in and doing like flat colors, right? So a lot of the time these shapes aren't closed off, so it's going to be hard for me to fill them in. But so I can do the top of the helmet, but we kind of get the flats in there, which at this point now is just paint by numbers. So if I reference that layer, now what that's doing is even though I'm on this layer, it's paying attention to the lines that are there. And then I can grab it's dark green, that is his helmet, right? And I can start to, whoops. So I said, see, that's not closed off down
Right. You'd
down
clean
here
that
at the
up.
bottom. Yeah. But we just start kind of like filling it in. With Ubin, thankfully, I know his colors really well.
But you have your palettes already selected, and that's probably a whole other discussion, creating the palettes for a single character in a comic or cartoon.
Yeah. And then from there, I create another layer. And then for this project, I do color burn when I'm laying out my shadows. And I have a specific color for shadows. Don't use black. That's a tip for everybody. Don't ever use black for your shadows. I'm using black for my line art because we're going for a comic book style, right? But normally I actually wouldn't use black for my line art. I would choose something else. But you can see how like when we start to get this in here, and then we start to add like volume to things.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You're causing things to lift and separate, and it's interesting with just that color. Yeah.
Yeah, just really, really quickly. It's like all of a sudden now those aren't flat. Now they have 3 dimensions to them, right? So I would do that over the whole thing. This is obviously I'm just like roughing that out really quickly. And then for Ubin, I usually use this fluorescent pink as his highlight color, because he's usually got his laser trident, and it's pink. And again, I'm doing these at like much harsher values right now than I normally would, because I want to like figure them out, right? But it really doesn't take much with a style like this to be like, oh, cool, that starts to look finished.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. It's actually really fast when you add the shadow, what you're calling the shadows or whatever, the texture.
Yeah.
It sort of almost instantly, looks kind of, like a finished cartoon. It's also amazing with the face. I mean, we talked about it the other day, but I kind of didn't think about initially that Ubin doesn't have a face. Like, we don't know what he looks like. And the gag of like, he's probably just really normal. Like, there's nothing, like, he's not, nothing about him is that anything. Like, he just, inherited or stole the war technology, right? That's like his thing. And everything else about him is normal. He's not like the smartest guy. He's probably not the dumbest guy, but he's just kind of a jerk. And it's really the corrupting power of that technological apparatus. So yeah, he dresses himself up fancy, but like underneath, we're not going to even give him the dignity of like drawing his face. It's a mystery. It's a cartoon. Does not matter. Which I think is kind of rad.
So you can see I do that little bit of airbrushing, and now all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, now it's really 3D, right? But you can see like it really doesn't take a lot.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So, so thanks for showing us how you do that.
Yeah.
So, I guess the question of a piece like this is a larger piece, right? Because it's not a
Yeah.
standalone quarter-page illustration. It's a full scene. It's a full page. And you can see a bunch of the other illustrations of the figures that are used in different ways throughout the book. How long would that take you to finalize, you think? I mean, not just for sort of conversation purposes.
I can tell you. We can actually get that information.
Oh, we got data?
I think it's under, Canvas information.
I don't know why I said that. Data, not data. Sorry.
Statistics. There you go. So the track time on this illustration is 4 hours and 49 minutes. And I just finished this earlier today. So yeah. Now that's not entirely accurate because the sketch that would have been underneath this came from a different file. So that sketch took longer. But yeah, so I would say like all in, it's this is probably looking at 6 hours, maybe like 7 hours on most like detailed stuff like this. Ubin's tough. He's got all these like scales and like he's got all this sort of these little like grommets and stuff like that on everything. But when we go back to character, like Le Guin is a lot quicker because you can see that Le Guin is a lot of just like larger shapes. So that's a character that I don't know. This one again is going from a sketch that existed prior.
Sure.
But, an hour and 13 minutes to ink and color this one.
And that's going back to your idea of building up a visual grammar for yourself as an artist, like for each project too, because we didn't really touch on that, but for any given project, you, at least the way it seemed like you approach it, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, you did a bunch of sketch work early for what the characters generally would look like. And then every time you're starting, you can kind of, I don't know if you're literally copying and pasting, but at least like your hand and mind, like, kind of what you want. And whether they hold something on the left or the right side, I mean, all those things you just sort of decided either arbitrarily or non-arbitrarily like months ago. So you can kind of build on that and keep going. And I know with some of the other work we've done, it's been fun to see that with artists where they figure out, they sort of unlock the puzzle of like what the world looks like. And then so every time they dip back in, it hopefully in theory is like easier in that sense. I
mean, I approached this one very much like I would if I was doing an animated series or a comic book, and had other people that were going to come in and do stuff, and need to have like a show Bible and a visual language to it. So yeah, there was a lot of development up front, and then everything is faster. Like everything that I've done, every new illustration that I do is a faster one than the previous one because the decisions are already made for a lot of stuff. But then there are things that like getting in and doing the play sets. Like I think I still did these pretty quick. That one says 10 hours. That's not accurate because that one, I think I duplicated the file from the Treetop Village one. So that's two together. I think this was the Bone Snake Castle was probably 3 or 4 hours, but it all depends on the complexity of it, right? Like some of these I can crank out pretty quick, and some of them are going to take a little bit longer. But
well, that's a lot of hours. So for one, wow, thanks. That's cool. Also, it's interesting to think about that process and to see it start to come to life. Maybe Michael, we can do this again sometime and maybe even see the same piece, as it evolves and like look at, how it started, where it is now. Is there anything else you'd want to do tonight? Do you want to try to wrap it up or?
No, I think, we can wrap it up at this point. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Any final questions? Anyone in the chat want to say anything before we close out? And thanks for hanging out with us. We're just, talking about art.
Yeah. It was nice to have all these people watching me draw. Usually I'm just sitting in my office by myself in silence. I've got usually I have my headphones in or on, whether it's like my earbuds or my over the ear. I'll put them on, and then if I don't put the music or the podcast on before I pick up my iPad, I will sit for 3 hours in silence. And draw, because once the hyper focus kicks in, all bets are off. Especially if it's after midnight. Yeah.
No, that's I mean, many of us who do some sort of artistic pursuit can probably, think about reflect on our own practice. So it's always interesting to see other people and hear, tips and just think about, in this case, especially character design. So thanks again, Michael J. Cohen, enter the Nostalgitron, author and illustrator, designer. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on, designing, bringing to life characters. And thanks for everybody who's listened. You probably already know, but it's stillfleet.com/enter if you want to check out the new project. And we will be closing out the campaign late next week and moving on to some other new fun stuff. But yeah, thanks a lot. Wind Up Monkey, Vex, Avi, Taylor, everybody who's in the chat. Vex recommends the song Frontiers by Awitch or Awitch. I don't know if I'm saying that right. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording. Or the what's it called? The stream. Stop the stream.
Thanks, guys.
Good night. Bye-bye.